We have an expert here. Our next speaker, Vishal Ghariwala, the Senior Director and CTO Asia Pacific at SUSE. He is here to talk about securing the financial sectors and shielding APIs from the dark side of cyber threats. Please join me welcome Vishal.
All right. A very good afternoon to everyone. Am I audible at the back? Good. Thank you so much. So I've been listening to a lot of the great conversations that we have seen over the past, 2 or 3 panels, and I think it's pretty apparent that when when we talk about APIs, there are 2 sides to it. One is the whole aspect of how APIs help you to democratize a lot of assets so that you can build new business models, new economic models, and that's what we have heard from some of the panels. So that is one part to it. The other part to really ensuring how APIs will allow you to do all that is to make sure that we have the alignment from the regulatory angle. And that often becomes very tricky because there are a lot of bureaucracies in place, and some of the conversations we heard around, it's not so much about technology, it's not so much about the business model. It boils down to a lot of the regulations and all that. And then obviously there is the third part, which I believe is the very critical part. It's how the technology can fit into all of these things to really help you drive new business models using APIs. So if you look at how the banking sector has evolved, traditionally when we look at banks, our perception of a bank was we go to this brick and mortar institution to do a lot of our banking activities, like giving money, moving money, managing money, inside, so on and so forth. And this is a very trusted way of doing this. We have been doing this for decades. And what has changed today is that the newer generation of users, and as well as the advent of technology, has essentially brought a new dynamic into the whole scheme of things, which is today, beyond interacting with the bank, what is even more important is how do we drive an experience that is very differentiated for consumers. So it's not so much about what the bank offers you, but it's more about how can the consumers do a lot of their financial transactions in a very seamless manner that is centered around the customer. So it's all about customer-centered experience, and the layer that makes all of this possible, it's really, and some of the speakers mentioned, is the ecosystem. Today we see a lot of different offerings out in the market, a lot of applications that allow you to do mobility type of transactions, but at the same time, through that same interface, without leaving the application altogether, you are also able to do something in the insurance space, embedded insurance, or in the financial space like transferring money. Buy now, pay later is something that is picking up quite a bit in this part of the world. And all this is enabled by the entire ecosystem that we see here. So what we see today is that new ecosystems have come up, and this is really what is driving all these new business models and the whole API economy that a lot of API folks talk about. It's really driven by that. I've been working with APIs for the past 10 years, even before the term APIs was coined, and I've seen how while the technology is the same, the business model has changed tremendously. Back in the 2005, APIs were called web services. It was not as fancy as today. Today, API is the next big thing. It's not so much about the technology, but it's a business use case that it is basically enabling. And it's taking off in a big way. It's because today it's driven by consumers. We know in the digital age the importance of consumers, because your business, how big it is, basically ties to how many consumers you have. And unlike the old days where you can go to a bank and you'll be a lifetime bank user, or an insurance company for that matter. Today it is very easy to switch from one bank to the other bank, right? It's just a matter of clicks, and you can do a lot of the transactions that you want to do very seamlessly, very easily. And that is why the traditional banks have to now do things differently to address, all this new competition that they're getting from the challenger banks. So what we have seen, right, over the past couple of years is how traditional banks have also made a concerted effort to evolve and become digital banks, so as to provide the same level of trust that people have with regards to traditional banks. But now how do we can bring the same trust and the same capabilities in the digital realm? What is enabling all this? It's basically APIs that are enabling all this. Obviously, on the other side of the spectrum, we have all these fintechs, or insurance tech company, as well as the super apps, who are now coming into the turf of the traditional banks and the digital banks, and setting up neo banks. As I understand, Hong Kong itself has 8 virtual banks. That's huge. I mean, it's much more than Singapore, where I come from. So basically, the competition is there. And the thing about neobanks, and that's why I put the heart there, it's a difference between what people love and what people trust. The people from the olden days, where I come from, my generation, trust is very important. I want to park my money with an institution that I can trust. But I think the modern generation, especially the Gen Z, it's more about love. And I think to them, trust may not be as important as the experience. How are the neobanks transforming and addressing the needs of this new generation? Well, APIs are the APIs basically enabling all of this. Now, while we talk about APIs and all this new business model, one of the things that often becomes an afterthought is the fundamental block that enables APIs, which is nothing but data. Because at the end of the day, it's all about my data that I'm going to be sharing, that is going to be used by all the ecosystem, the banks, the neobanks, to create these new experiences. And where there is data involved, there is always the other piece, which is how do I ensure that my data is treated and used in a manner that I'm happy with, that I'm okay with. And that becomes a very key thing, often becomes an afterthought, because people talk a lot about, hey, let's create this new business model, let's get the regulators to comply. But then what about the data, right? It's beyond just securing the data and from a regulatory angle. Today, when we look at cyber security threats that are impacting the financial sector, this is a list. If you look at API exploits, that is number one. More or less, a lot of different analysts and a lot of different experts put this as number one, for the simple reason, not because it's easy to exploit an API, because there are just so many APIs available out there today. And it is like, think of an API as an entry point to a well-fortified and secure system that you have. Every API is a potential opportunity for a bad actor to compromise your data. And therefore, whenever we have APIs, we also have the cybersecurity conversation in conjunction with that. Now, in addition to that, there are a lot of other things that we see in the market today, like malware, ransomware, insider threats, how legacy defenses are not working. And I think the last one, right, which is actually something that I was reading a report by HK Cert. They had like four what you call trends, cybersecurity trends in Hong Kong. And one of them is crime as a service, which is basically you offload all these hacking activities to a third party, you pay them a money and they do this job for you. Ransom as a service, hacking as a service, DDoS as a service. So there are a lot of different threats out there. So I think the thing is, while we talk a lot about innovation, the other side of the spectrum is the downside of innovation is security, and we have seen that happening with every age of innovation. And therefore, today, while we are at this conference, I want to spend a bit of time talking about what are some of the dynamics that have made cybersecurity move to the top of a C-level's mind. What are those? So one of the things that has changed is how our IT landscape has evolved. And I think one of the panelists talked a little bit about that, is as in how in the past we had a traditional brick and mortar infrastructure, which is our data center, where we know what the attack surface is like. And if you draw that parallel with how the banking sector has changed and is evolving with the introduction of fintechs, you talk about traditionally, if you want to do a transaction, you go to a bank. So if you want to hack a bank, you need to have guns and go into the bank. That's the only way to hack it. But when things become digital, then you don't need guns. You need code to hack it, right? So what's happening is the attack surface is growing. Likewise, what has happened for IT is the attack surface is growing. Why? Because of cloud. So the benefit of cloud is it allows you to get harness the computational power everywhere. The downside of it is that it is able to harness computational power everywhere and to be used by the bad actors. So what we see happening today is that as companies are rolling out newer and newer fintech applications to provide customers with the type of experience that they need, high availability, reliability, very low latency is going to be extremely critical. And that means that you need to expand beyond your traditional data center and also addressing the scale, right? Because if you look at Hong Kong, I think at 7 or 8 million people, scale. And if you look at other countries, like for example, India or China, it goes into the billions. We can't run away from the fact that we need a distributed architecture. But then you can see that the entire attack surface has grown bigger. It becomes more complicated. Instead of just securing what you previously had, which is your data center, today the FSI industry needs to ensure that all of these other potential entry points, infrastructure entry points, are also secure. Think about super apps. I like to use the analogy of super apps. The greatest thing about super apps is you can do a lot of things from one single app. Your mobility, your healthcare, your financial transactions. But think about it. You just need one loophole and everybody can have all the data for healthcare, for your finances easily. So it's the same thing, right? When you bring things together, more of those, the attack surface increases. Now, what is then important is really to understand what this attack surface really is, because security is a very interesting beast, because it's never enough. When it comes to security, it's never enough. So what is a reference then? So I take this example from Gartner because they are very well known analyst, and this is a triangle that they have built. This is what we call the multiple layer of defense, a layered defense. When we look at security, and there are multiple aspects of it, right from the infrastructure to API gateways, and then also to the code that is running. If we want to build what you call new applications leveraging APIs, I think it is imperative that we start to think across the stack and not just stop at the API level. I found this quote at the on the World Economic Forum website, and this quote is by one of the leading cybersecurity experts in the world, and it is very interesting if you read what he says. Basically, the odds are against the protectors. What that also means, right, if you look at it in a different angle, is that all you need is to find one vulnerability in an API, and that can allow you to do significant amount of damage, and especially if you're in highly regulated industries, fintech, where so much of critical data, important data that is going to be traversing, it's going to become very critical. I know that in the morning we have had some discussion on the importance of protecting the API against exploits, but then this is like an iceberg. The API is just 10% of security, because at the end of the day, what is an API? If I wear my technical hat, it's nothing but just a wrapper. It doesn't do anything much. What really does the actual thing is the underlying application logic, which could be your Java code, which could be your microservices, any code that is written using your languages. And this is the area that is really doing a lot of the important things. And some of the challenges that, or some of the things that you see here, data loss, vulnerability, insider threats, zero-day attacks, ransomware, configuration errors, compliance, malware, all your application logic that are powering your APIs, they are subjected to all of this. And we see a lot of things happening out there, how vulnerabilities are exploited and how a lot of data is stolen. So you can do a lot of cool things with your APIs from a security angle, and that's absolutely important. Because we want to make sure, if you use a layered security approach, we want to secure every level. But what if, let's say, it breaks through the API level and goes into the code level? If we have an ability to also protect it at that level, which is, I would say, a more important level, because that's where your code is, I think that will help you drive and strengthen your security posture further. So this is what we need to do. We need to fortify this piece as well, because this is, I would say, the 80% of the iceberg. API is at the top, but what is below this is, I would say, even more important. So what are some of the strategies that enterprises can look at to mitigate some of the new cyber threats that I had on the slide earlier? And to do that, I would like to do a very quick 101 into how business logic is built by enterprises today. When they roll out APIs, how are they building the applications, the business logic that are powering those APIs? And that is basically based on three channels. They have three ways to do that. They could download projects from the open source repositories. They could also use third-party applications from software vendors, third-party software vendors, and they could also have their internal developers build that code. Or today with technologies like GitHub Pilot, leveraging AI and generative AI, they can use generative AI to write the code. What we want to make sure is that whatever code that they are building from the beginning, it's error-free, so that we are able to build a trusted software supply chain that will be used to build that higher level APIs that you'll be rolling out. And there are two key things that we need to look at to do that. Now, first of all, to ensure that all these different avenues from where we are getting the code from, it's scanned for vulnerabilities, code vulnerabilities. It's scanned for it continuously and fixed immediately. Secondly, we also want to make sure that it is compliant with all the regulations that we have laid out within our enterprise. It's also not just about regulations, but simple things like how you have configured your environment. Because a lot of times security incidents happen not because of vulnerabilities, but it's because somebody has carelessly forgot to tweak some parameters, and that opened up a big a door to bad actors. So that's one of the important things that you need to do. I think the other important thing to do is something known as zero-day vulnerabilities or zero trust. And this whole notion here is that, like I mentioned, we can do everything that we want to do when it comes to security, but every once in a while we come up with an incident called a zero-day incident, where there is a vulnerability in code and there is no solution available. Right? There's no solution available. It's an unknown. So how do you deal with unknowns? How do you deal with exploits that happen, for example, today, and there is no solution available? And every vendor, every company is trying to patch it and roll it out so that all their what you call infrastructure, all their code is patched. The time that they take to patch it is basically the window of opportunity for bad actors to really exploit their infrastructure. Right? So what we want to do here is to really have a way to trap the unknown. And this really requires us to relook at the way that cybersecurity has been treated in the past, where we are really defining what people, what applications, what processes are able to do. And it's like are not able to do. It's like a deny list. And to change and relook at and adopt a different way of defining security policies, where we clearly define what applications are able to do. So if I have the privilege to just do 10 things, and if there is a vulnerability that basically tries to do other things, I will still not be able to do that. So that is essentially what zero trust is, and how you can overcome 0-day vulnerabilities using zero trust principles. And I think one of the most so I do have an example here, but I'm going to skip it because I wanted to remove the slide, but it was a bit difficult to get it out. But I want to go to the third part, right, which is something that it's extremely critical today when there's a talent shortage, when technology is getting more and more complicated, and when there is this the great pressure for companies to continuously innovate and compete and outdo their competitors. I think one of the best and easiest, fastest way to do that is through automation, and it applies to security as well. So the ability for you to quickly identify vulnerabilities using automation is going to be critical, and in addition to that, the ability for you to quickly roll out your solution, your remediation solution across your entire distributed environment is going to be as important as well. Because think of it, in a distributed environment, you don't have one server or two servers, you have tens, hundreds of servers. And what is really going to help you is automation, because then you will have an automated manner to get everything out very, very quickly. So I work at SUSE, and a lot of the challenges that I talked about, these are the areas that we have solutions for. And we have two offerings here, Rancher and SUSE New Vector. And really what we try to do is help you build modern cloud native applications that are hardened using best practices around security that I mentioned, so that you can roll out your this API architectures in a very secure manner. And basically, we allow you to do three key things from a cybersecurity angle to help you create a trusted software supply chain for the APIs that you're going to be rolling out. Secondly, we allow you to effectively address 0-day vulnerabilities, 0-day security incidents. And finally, we allow you to do 1 and 2 very quickly and very effectively through automation. And I bring this up again because this top part of the triangle that I showed earlier, which is what the triangle from Gartner, these are all the things that we allow you to do through our solutions. Things like managing your vulnerabilities, automating behavior-based controls, layer 7 micro-segmentation, web application firewall, and so on and so forth. But basically, if you look at it, right, all the things that will be powering your API gateways, your APIs, how do you secure that? This is what our solution helps you to do. So key takeaways, right? So today's financial sector, consumers are expecting a user-centric experience, and that is what is driving the adoption of APIs, and the ecosystems are actually enabling that. Securing your APIs is important, but I think we also need to have a good strategy to ensure that we have end-to-end perspective on how we are going to secure the entire architecture. And finally, using newer modern approaches like zero trust and security automation, it's going to be very critical for us to handle these new cybersecurity attack vectors. Just before I round off, SUSE is a German company. We've been around for 31 years, and we have customers across the globe in some of the very prominent verticals that you see over here. And we are one of the leading open source companies. So whatever we do, it's done using open source principles, open source methodologies, and we work very, very closely with some of the largest partners that you see, as well as with a lot of foundations and communities that are creating innovative open source technologies. And finally, we have customers across every, literally every vertical that you can think of. Thank you very much. We are at the back, and if you have any questions, we'll be very happy to have a word with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vishal, for your sharing. Now, it's time for a short network break. take this chance to mingle with the panel participants here. But I would like to suggest that
the API Connect Hong Kong 2023 conference is powered by bNovelty Limited. Check out more API-related education content on bnovelty.com or apidays.hk for more information.